Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of H675.
You've heard the request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the gentleman has the floor to begin the debate.
And Mr. Speaker, I also request unanimous consent to quote the U.S. Supreme Court decisions as needed.
Without objection, the gentleman may refer and quote from the aforementioned Supreme Court decision.
Mr. Speaker, this bill is about protecting children, which is a legitimate state interest. We do that all of the time. We need to stop sterilizing and mutilating children under the age of 18. This bill is not about adults or adult trans community at all. This is about children. In 2019, the legislature unanimously passed Idaho Code 18-1506B, outlawing genital mutilation of a female child and imposing a felony penalty. That's already established law, unchallenged in the state of Idaho. Today, we're asking you to amend the bill to include boys and girls who have their genitals mutilated by chemicals or surgery for the purpose of changing their birth sex. There are exceptions for rare cases of birth defects or chromosomal disorders as appropriate. There's a term, gender dysphoria. Maybe you've heard that, maybe you haven't. But that is a medical term applied by psychologists for a child confused about their sex. DSM-5 is the medical book I used to work with for mental disorders. It's utilized by psychologists, psychiatrists. It lists gender confusion as a mental illness. And by the way, a child's sex is determined not at birth, but at conception, when an X or a Y chromosome fertilizes the egg. XY is male, XX is female. Maybe remember that from biology class a long time ago. Even our hair follicles and our teeth have XX or XY chromosomes in them, designating us as male or female. By and large, there are no peer-reviewed, evidence-based medical studies on surgical interventions for gender dysphoria in children. So how should children be treated? This is a mental illness that needs to be treated. I think we can all agree on that. The psychologists, psychiatrists do. How about old-fashioned counseling, talk therapy? That's what's been going on. Traditional psychology methods. The vast majority of gender-confused children, if allowed to go through puberty, outgrow the problem and accept their bodies over time. So what's happened in Idaho? Why are we bringing this bill? Children as young as 11, 12, 13 are getting puberty blockers, which are inserted surgically to stop them from going through puberty. After about 4 months, they are usually sterilized for life. That's a permanent decision. Later, they have healthy organs and genitals removed, and they're certainly sterilized for life. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I keep mentioning sterilization as we go further, so please pay attention. Puberty blockers are not FDA approved for sex change surgery. They are off-label used for this procedure. Just an FYI. There are serious side effects to puberty blockers besides sterilization: depression, lowered IQ, loss of bone density, joint problems, and a suspected many other things. And there's a sad history of sterilization that we need to go back in history. About 1907, it became popular to sterilize women of color. It became popular to sterilize children of lower IQ across this country. I can't remember if it was 25, 30 states started sterilizing people of certain classes. This was popular among big foundations that are still in existence today in the United States, famous people. And they said this is the way to purify our race or improve our country by doing this. Abhorrent, horrible. And it took until 1942 for the U.S. Supreme Court to step in and officially recognize and stop those types of things. Some states started stopping that in their Supreme Courts. So the fundamental right to procreate is acknowledged by our U.S. Supreme Court and has been since 1942. This is where it's critical, can parents and counselors decide to permanently deprive a minor child of their constitutional right to procreate before those children have reached legal capacity consent? No, they cannot and should not be able to. U.S. Supreme Court in Gonzalez versus Carhart, 2007, determined state and federal governments have wide discretion to pass legislation in areas where there is medical and scientific uncertainty. And there's certainly uncertainty here in what we're discussing. The U.S. Supreme Court recognizes the right to procreate is a fundamental right under the 14th Amendment, Skinner versus Oklahoma, 1942. One who suffers sterilization, quote, is forever deprived of basic liberty. The federal Medicaid program does not allow parents of a minor to consent to sterilization procedures. As a society, we don't treat body consciousness issues with surgery. Child anorexia is not treated with liposuction. If we do not allow minors to get tattoos, smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, or sign legal contracts, why would we allow them to make decisions to cut away healthy organs based on their feelings during puberty time? To decide they give up that fundamental right of procreation, that's wrong. They're not ready for that. Nobody should make that decision for them. I've heard from a number of doctors in state and out of state who do not support underage sex change surgeries, including puberty blockers. Europe is pulling back from this type of procedure now because they've seen the negative effects, and there's no positive mental health effect for children who undergo this over time. And I have these organizations if you'd like to know who they are. So, Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you please give this your green light. Protect our children in their tender years.
Is there further debate? Debate from 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to debate against the bill.
Have the floor.
Thank you. Well, I guess just at the outset, I would challenge the fiscal note because there is no question this will be challenged in court, and it will be quite costly to the state. I think it raises serious equal protection questions, and it would be subject to heightened scrutiny, as such bills have that make distinctions based on transgender status. So we would not get rational basis review. I think it would be subject to that heightened review where the state would have a hard time making a case banning a procedure for transgender folks that has been approved in appropriate circumstances by the medical profession at the highest levels throughout the country, from the American Medical Association down to the Idaho Medical Association, which opposes this bill. But beyond the legality, I just wanted to talk from the heart a little bit because I have a good friend who I will call Kathy. I don't want to put her real name out here. But about 6 years ago, her child, who was transgender, wished to start pursuing the gender reassignment process. The child was still in high school, was a minor, and they were embarking on this road of starting the treatments and all of the hormone treatments, et cetera. And I remember going out with her, and I remember saying, and I had a lot of the same thoughts that you all have. And I said, well, gosh, are you sure? Are you really sure? Are you really, really, really sure? Because, teenagers change their mind on things, and they don't always have their life completely figured out. And do you really want to take such a big step when, they may decide otherwise in a couple years? And my friend kind of gave me a hard look and was just, you really think I haven't thought of these things? You think I haven't spent 2,000 hours talking to my child and my husband and the therapist and our pastor and the doctors and my friends and my sister and my mother? This is obviously not a step that a family takes lightly. This is a step that comes after literally thousands of hours of agonizing. There is no parent in the world who is just, finding a way to force sex change treatments onto their kids. They do this because they realize after endless, excruciating probing that this is what their child needs. And in her case, her child had known they were in the wrong body since the day they were born, just about. I mean, since they were a toddler, it had tormented them. This was not something that they just came to in a teenage, sudden moment. This had been tormenting this child since they were a toddler. They were more than a decade into this process by the time they started having these questions. And I have to say, they did proceed. And it was, my friend was right to do so. It was a total success. The child transitioned from female to male, started at a new school as their preferred gender, made friends as a boy, successfully completed high school, and it was like a switch had flipped off. I mean, it was amazing. It was like the problem's gone overnight. The depression, the suicidality, all of the distractions and miseries were gone. It was like, then they actually described it as having like a giant tumor on your face just removed. All of a sudden, problem gone. Went off to college, did fantastically well, made friends, successful. They went from being an unbelievably troubled youth who would very likely have made an attempt on their own life to moving forward in life and with total success. And you know, when you're talking about something that a child sees as a giant tumor on their face, you can't talk your way through that with a therapist. That is not something that just counseling can deal with. That child needed to transition. And I felt bad afterwards that I had second guessed that. I didn't second guess her, but even asking the question, I felt like kind of a jerk. Because who in the world am I to second guess this family who loves this child more than anybody else in the world? There's nobody that's going to love that kid like that mother, or who's going to put more time and anguish into figuring out the right thing to do. And it was inappropriate for me, and definitely inappropriate for this legislature, to come in and override that family's decision that was extremely well thought out after many tears and many long nights and many long days and many long years. And, you know, boy, this just doesn't feel like it's in line with what I've been hearing in this body for the last 8 years. If I had a dime for every time I've heard about how parents know best and the Idaho legislature shouldn't be overriding what families feel is best for their children, this is the heaviest imaginable hand of government overriding family decisions on the most critical and, frankly, in many cases, life-threatening questions. I believe my friend probably saved her child's life by moving forward with this very, very difficult decision. And you know, I mean, in the end, I have to applaud her for going with her gut, for going with her love, for going with her investment in her child. And it's not always the right case, but I think when it's not the right case, they know it. They probe. People do not proceed with medical procedures where there's any doubt. Where it's just something that a kid came up with 3 weeks ago, nobody's doing medical procedures. This is something that they proceed with after the kid has known for 10, 15 years. This is not something that any family wants to or ever would rush into. It's something that is profoundly well thought out, and it's something that we are out of line for messing with. Now, I want to talk also, because I'm really disturbed by the inclusion of puberty blockers in this bill, which can be injected. They are not a permanent surgical alteration. They are something that actually, when you stop taking the puberty blockers, puberty arrives. It's a fully reversible thing. And seems profoundly inappropriate for me to be included in a section about genital mutilation. Now, some of you may say, well, what's the harm in waiting till you're the age of adulthood? What's the harm in just pushing this decision off till you're 18? A lot of harm, folks. A lot of harm. Allowing puberty to run its course changes the body in profound and irreversible ways. So to be very blunt, let's say you're doing a male to female transition. Whether you do that transition when you're 5'7", or whether you do it when you're 6'3" with giant broad shoulders and an Adam's apple, is really going to impact you for the next 70 years of your life in how successful that transition is. You are forcing people into a situation where the transition for the rest of their life on Earth will be far less effective. You are really messing with their lives till their dying day if you prevent them from taking action with these puberty blockers. And again, this is very, very well thought out. This is not something that is done lightly. It is reversible, but the things that happen if you don't do the puberty blockers are not reversible. And I think that, you know, we are way out of our lane making decisions for people about what they're going to look like and how they're going to live their lives for the next 70 years of their days on Earth. Again, you know, this procedure has been underscored as appropriate in certain circumstances by many medical professionals, including the AMA, the Endocrine Society, and others. And we are dealing with a very, very delicate population here, and I think we're being a little bit of a bull in a china shop. These are kids where over half of trans kids have seriously contemplated suicide. And in many cases, the only thing that can address their problem. It is not talk therapy. They have been through a lot of talk therapy. It is not working for the kids that are seriously considering medical procedures. The only thing that will work for them is medical procedures. So again, I hope that everybody here will be consistent with the rhetoric that has floated around this body in terms of deferring to family decision making on such crucial and intimate and medical matters. I hope you will give this your red light.
Fifteen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just want to add that if this bill passes, it not only undermines the belief that parents know what's best for their children, which I hear every single day in committee, but it also undermines the belief that in body autonomy. So if we're going to be consistent with the majority of the rhetorical comments we hear in this chamber, then you vote no on this bill. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 17.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, this is a difficult subject for all of us, I think. And for me, I had to look at what the evidence was that was presented in our committee and what the source and the sources of that evidence. And we found out that the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society, the Pediatric Endocrine Society recognized this condition as a real medical problem. And they've developed many guidelines. And then the thought came, well, these are national organizations, and, you know, this is Idaho. And the executive director of the Idaho Medical Association appeared at our committee. And she said the IMA felt this bill went too far. She felt that it interfered too much with the treatment that doctors and families want to have for this very serious, and difficult issue that some kids go through. And that's what persuaded me, was our own Idaho doctors coming forth and saying this. But then there was something else that persuaded me a lot, and it wasn't too much presented in committee, but I did inquire about it, and that is physician malpractice. Because I felt that if this treatment was really being abused, and if there were these serious problems, the trial lawyers out there would be out there suing all kinds of doctors for malpractice, and they would be winning those lawsuits. And so I inquired if anybody knew, if any of the proponents knew, of a single lawsuit in the United States of America that had been filed for malpractice arising out of these kinds of treatments. And the answer I got was no. Not one single lawsuit filed for physician malpractice. And I think, as I can't give you the exact statistics, but there are many physician and hospital malpractice cases filed every year. So when I looked at that kind of evidence, and I heard from people who had young people and older people who had undergone this treatment, explained their very difficult and personal issues, I felt that I had to vote no against this bill. It went too far. And for that reason, I will have to vote no. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 16.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find that House Bill 675 represents a fundamental misunderstanding of transgender people, and in particular, transgender youth. And so much of what's contained in the bill, I feel, is not even worth debating against. But what I would like to share with you all has to do with the LGBT experience. And many of you know that I represent one of those letters. Now, I'm not transgender. I'm gay. But some of the experiences that I've had are very similar to experiences that transgender people experience. I would remind you all, or perhaps maybe let you know for maybe the first time, gay children are typically raised by straight parents. And as it applies to this bill, transgender children are generally raised by cisgender parents. We had a bill that was very similar to this a couple of years ago, and so I wish that I could have heard some of the testimony in this year's committee. But I know when we heard this before, I remember hearing from so many of the parents and the very challenging situations that they're presented with. That as you become a parent, you have all of these visions of what you expect will happen for your child. And that they will marry the man or the woman of their dreams, and they will become that person that they are destined to be, perhaps that God has destined them to become. And then their child presents them with a set of facts that alters that course. And so then you have to look at your child in a completely different way now. And I'm grateful that I had parents who loved me for who I was and have embraced me. And as I listened to those parents a couple of years ago, how their vision for their child had changed, but they wanted to do what was best for them. And they knew that how challenging that this was, and how challenging that it was going to be for them to come out as a parent of a transgender child. And I applaud those parents and their courage, as well as the young people who have let their parents know, I think I'm a little different. This bill represents a fundamental misunderstanding of transgender people, and in particular trans youth, and I hope you will give it a red light.
Is there further debate? Gentleman 26.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anybody who has paid any attention to my time in this body this session knows that if I don't have Health and Welfare Committee meeting in the morning, I can often be found lurking around state affairs. It's a committee that deals with a lot of policy issues that I find very interesting. So last week I tried to sit in when House Bill 675 was being heard by the committee, and I was unable to walk in. There was not a seat available. It was absolutely packed. So I came up here, I sat right here at my desk, and I watched the stream. And multiple people, multiple trans individuals testified on the record to everyone in that committee that day that had they not had access to the health care that they had, that they would not have been there to testify, that they would have killed themselves. And I know this to be true because I also have a trans family member. My mom's cousin was born a male back in the 60s when the trans condition was barely understood. My second cousin struggled growing up. They were confused, they were combative with family members, ended up on the streets, addicted to alcohol and drugs, several crimes, repeated suicide attempts. My entire family was concerned for their well-being. We were concerned that they would overdose and die. We were concerned that they would commit a crime so severe that they would end up in prison and not just jail, or that the next suicide attempt would be successful. My second cousin kind of dropped off the radar for several years. Nobody Nobody heard anything. And then they came back, but they were now living as a female. They had gone to a foreign country, and they had had gender reassignment surgery. And they were now living as they felt they had needed to. Life was much better than before because they were finally living as they were supposed to. So what this bill will do, if it passes, is it will take kids and turn them either into a story like my second cousins, or they will kill themselves. Now, to the best of my knowledge, nobody in this room has a trans child. I certainly don't, and I don't believe that any of you do either. We sit around here and we call ourselves pro-life in this body, but if this bill passes, that will most certainly not be true, because a yes vote will be a noose around the neck of kids who want to live, but not like this. A regular point in this institution is that we are the safeguard for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but this bill passing will show that this body is against life unless this body defines how it is to be lived. This bill passing will be taking liberty away because it doesn't fit our definition of liberty, and this bill passing will most certainly take away happiness, and it will instead replace it with depression and with sorrow and with the needless death of more trans individuals. We sit here today and we will make life and death decisions for families with this vote. The language of this bill is so inconsistent with modern medical care. We are going to make the doctors and the nurses and the therapists and the parents who are desperate to keep their children alive, we are going to make them felons. Think about that for one more second. We should not be making keeping children alive a crime. In fact, I believe there's legislation pending that would do just the opposite. It would make the death of an unborn child a crime. We should be embracing the fact that there is now a way to keep our kids alive who have previously killed themselves.
Mr. Speaker,
Lady from one.
I object.
On what grounds do you object?
He doesn't know that if these kids don't get this surgery, they're going to die. You can't really make broad statements like that.
Okay, I get the point.
Thank you.
And his opinion is as valid as the others in the room. That point or two, good gentlemen, you did paint with tempering things within my opinion.
Understood. Thank you, Mr.
My
Speaker.
experience, that type of thing. And
Understood.
Putting that on everyone would probably be appreciated. But the gentleman has the floor to continue his debate.
Thank you, sir. Countless hours have been spent on this very floor debating medical freedom in the name of COVID. And in fact, I believe 2 bills after this one will we...
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, our good lady from District 23.
Yeah, this would be the second time he's referred to pending legislation without asking unanimous consent.
Point taken. Don't do it again.
Fair enough. I'm not really referencing it. I'm just pointing out that it will be there. But I would ask unanimous consent to point out that in just 2 short votes, we will be voting on a bill about medical freedom.
That objection.
Mr. Speaker,
I
object. He's making the points without actually asking for permission. If you're going to refer to pending legislation, you need to ask permission prior to referring to the pending legislation.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay. Well, but now in an instance where we don't agree with how families choose to let their children live their lives, we will take their medical freedom away and replace it with felony charges. Freedom for me, but not freedom for thee. The bill sponsor will tell you that he believes intensive therapy is what is needed for children experiencing gender dysphoria. That is already happening. Any parent of a trans child will tell you that they've already spent years in therapy to get to this point. A gender dysphoric child doesn't walk into a consultation and walk out on puberty blockers. It takes months, if not years, of care to get to that point. Gender dysphoria is now a well-understood condition, as my family well knows. The medical professionals who treat it are lifesavers. They are not felons. And to think that we know what is best, we being this body, for families of children who are gender dysphoric is a fallacy. This is a body that consistently makes decisions in opposition to medical evidence, and this is a body that consistently makes decisions in opposition to legal advice and to case law as well. We consider ourselves the ultimate experts on all things, but our track record of being correct is not great. We've got a chance to make a bit of a course correction today that will be in line with modern medicine. A no vote on this bill will save lives, but I fear that a yes vote will be a death sentence in many instances moving forward. I can't in good conscience vote yes on kids killing themselves, and I would hope that you will take the remaining time before we vote to look deep into your hearts and ask yourself if you can live with that as well. I urge your no vote.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Lady from 31.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I'd just like to briefly address some of the comments about the importance of protecting life. I see this conversation in a really interesting way as an extension of the pro-life argument. Many of us hold a position that it's not appropriate for a mother even to make the decision to take the life of a child. The life of that child in those instances is held to be more important and sacred than the parental right of the mother to end the child's life. This question is similar in that we're not talking about the life of the child, but we are talking about the potential to give life to another generation. And so in that sense, there is a nexus on this issue. I don't see it as a contradiction. I think there are some important questions that have been raised about the ability of these treatments to save life. And I can tell you that I have research right here on my desk indicating that exhaustive studies did not show a significant reduction in psychological symptoms following these treatments. I'm sure that our friends on the other side of the aisle can cite studies showing the opposite, but one thing is clear, and that is that the science is not settled and there's not a conclusive argument to be made on those grounds. So at this point, I'm not going to comment further, but I did want to share those thoughts with you, and I would encourage your support. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate on the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can confirm the good gentleman from 26. I wouldn't call it lurking, but he is often found in House State Affairs and always is welcome there. So potentially as committee assignments are handed out, and I'm assuming he will be successful in his reelection, there will be another member that would like to serve on House State Affairs. One thing that hasn't been talked about yet is a couple of adults that gave testimony in committee. One of those gentlemen was a man who had gone through the gender reassignment surgery. And I found his testimony extremely compelling. In his teenage years, he struggled with his gender and his identity. And as I recall from his testimony, he said he would actually pray at night that God would change him from a biological male to a female. As life went on, he finally decided that it was in his best interest to go ahead and have a gender reassignment surgery. But as he testified in front of our committee last week, the man was weeping as he told his story and the results from that surgery. And he said, I wish that I would not have had that gender reassignment surgery. He's made changes to his body. He identifies as a biological male. But there were surgeries that were done to his body that would indicate he is a female. There was a lady that also testified, another adult, that struggled with the same issue in her teenage years, and today has found her identity as she is biologically is a female. We did hear testimony in committee from a lot of teenage kids that are struggling with their gender identity. So I think to dismiss that people are not struggling with this would be a fallacious argument. However, the good gentleman from 12 in his bill is simply trying to say as people are struggling with their identity and those questions of identity. It will be the state of Idaho's policy. You're not going to make any of those decisions in those tumultuous teenage years. Instead, you will make those decisions once you reach adult. And so I think it's a good policy. I know it's a difficult vote for you to make today, but I appreciate the good gentleman for tackling something that is a difficult issue, and I would urge your green light. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Good lady from District 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our transgender youth are so incredibly courageous, and I know how stressful it has been for transgender youth and their families as they've watched this bill move through the body. And I hope those children know they are perfect and loved just the way they are, trying to live their truth. They are courageous, but also vulnerable. An Idaho doctor has had to assist 3 transgender youth related to their suicide attempts since this bill was introduced. The proponents want us to focus on surgeries. Surgeries are extremely rare for minors. That's a very minor piece of what this bill does. This bill takes away the prescriptions. This bill attacks their care, which is by and large potentially life-saving prescriptions. Best practice medical care for transgender youth simply delays puberty until young people are old enough to make their own decisions about their lived gender. There's robust evidence about how this care can reduce depression and suicidality in youth. You have on your desk the abstract of a study that just came, another study just affirmed this a few weeks ago. The science is settled when the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Pediatric Endocrine Society, and the American Psychiatric Association all agrees that gender-affirming medical care is appropriate and good when families make these decisions together with their medical providers. We need to trust those parents and providers to make these deeply personal decisions. I ask for your red light.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate in favor of the bill. Science is awfully hard to settle because the concept of science is that we're actually constantly learning, right? I want to talk about mental health for a second. I have a cousin, it's not my child, but a cousin who went through a lot of trauma in her teen years, early teen years, lost her mother at a young age, went into a spiral. Her dad didn't know how to handle any of it. It was a messy situation. And that's not like this in every case, but in this case it was, and she decided that she didn't identify as a woman anymore. She identified as a man. And she, once she turned the age of 18, went through surgeries to try and make herself a man. But she did not become a man because she didn't have a physical health problem. She had a mental health problem. We all have some ethos that we live by. And when we come into this body as individuals, generally, we represent or reflect the people that live around us. And I want to share with you some of my ethos. Jesus said in red letters, "From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female." And he was quoting from the book of Genesis, which continues, "In the image of God, He created them. King David, a man after God's own heart, said in Psalm 139, "For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made." There are so many people in this world who need to hear that. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. No accidents, no mistakes. I support parental rights. I do not support child mutilation. I thank the good gentleman for bringing this legislation forward, and I will be supporting it. I hope you will too.
Or further debate? Gentleman 33.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debate in favor of this bill. In this body, I'm probably one of few that have worked with many young people in various states of mental capacity in their lifetime, including transgender youth and LGBT plus youth. And in my entire career, I think everybody would know that I've never once judged anybody. I don't use past judgment. I don't make them feel uncomfortable when they're around me. I serve them in the capacity to help them move forward in their process. I don't fix the problems when they're experiencing mental health concerns. They fix it themselves through coaching and through strength and giving them, reassurance and kindness and compassion. But even in that, they've learned throughout time, and when I work with them, that they know that we could be different in our views religiously, politically, and how we treat these issues. And as different people, we could be kind to one another, but we don't have to align in our values in all things. And so they would recognize that there's a respect there, and there's kindness. There's also a different obligation to do things either through my personal beliefs on morals. And in this case, this is one of those situations where a moral obligation, in my feeling, is that we need to pursue passing this bill. And I can give you some examples specifically where I've worked with families that were going through this process. And then a year or two later, that same individual changed their mind and wanted to go back to their original sex that they were born with. And that's a very detrimental part too. And to infer in any capacity, in any way, that this body, based on this decision, would lead to somebody dying by suicide is simply not true. We cannot make that assumption in any capacity. And our partners on the ground who are doing this great work every day, they'll agree with that. We don't make decisions on behalf of other people. I personally intervened at 4 o'clock in the morning as recently as a couple months ago with young people who are highly vulnerable and helping them to not die by suicide. I serve on boards that focus on that. My entire career has been dedicated to helping people, right? And I don't care what your background is or where you come from, what your sex is, what you identify as. I mean, we have this joke in our agency where we have a door that has a picture of a male, a female, a half female, an alien, and a Sasquatch, and we say, we don't care what you are, just wash your hands. And that's truly reflective of the type of people we are as respecting human beings for being human beings. But that's not the same thing as what we're faced with as a decision today in this body. We're making a decision on medical practices, and we're also talking about freedom of parents to make decisions. Well, I could tell you I've served lots of parents who've made really bad decisions on behalf of their kids and have led them astray to the point where they've been raped, molested, beaten. Some of those things you guys have talked about earlier this session when we talked about adverse childhood experiences, that's stuff that really matters. And to say that some of those parents have made bad decisions is very true. But again, we can serve them in the capacity of kindness and compassion even when they've made really terrible mistakes. So parents don't always make the perfect decisions on behalf of their kids, and this would have been one of those cases. I wouldn't recommend having this kind of a decision. It's a terrible thing to have to go through, and I have a lot of empathy for the families, but at the same time, I also want to express I don't feel kids are cognitively ready to make those kind of decisions, especially when I've seen multiple cases where they've wanted to go back to their original sex. And so I urge your green light on this bill.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, will the gentleman stand and close the debate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you all for the debate. I listened to each and every one respectfully. As to the Supreme Court in the future, this case may be challenged. I believe that our state will prevail. We are not alone in this movement that we are doing. Tennessee and Arkansas have passed similar laws, and there are 8 other states working to pass similar laws right now, and their bills are in various stages, just like ours are in their Capitol buildings. And also, I mean, I can list a long list of doctors, endocrinologists, both local and statewide, national, international, who believe this is the right step to take, that children should not be going through these surgeries. The American College of Pediatricians, the National Task Force for Therapy Equity, the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare, the Finnish Health Authority, the Health Authority of Finland, Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, that's an international body, the United Kingdom's Health Advisory Board, it's a National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, the National Academy of Medicine in France, the European Union for Fundamental Rights in Austria, Croatia, Italy, Lithuania, and Portugal, the Catholic Diocese of Idaho. Appreciate them very much for weighing in on this for children. And I won't list all of the doctors, but I have a list. I'm happy to share that with anyone if you like. So, and we had testimony at hearing in State Affairs. I couldn't cover it all here. And we had many doctors waiting online that didn't get to testify, and other people. But one doctor from Twin Falls who deals with these very issues in children, he said it's not medically ethical to go through these procedures, in his opinion. It's not within the medical standard of care, which is different than guidelines. Currently, these procedures are done with medical guidelines, which are more opinions than the official medical standard of care. In Texas, they consider this now through their Attorney General's office and their governor as child abuse, and they're investigating it likewise for that purpose. I ask you to be consistent with our U.S. Supreme Court that the ability to procreate is a fundamental right that must be protected for these children. Leave their bodies alone. Don't let our children be sterilized. Thank you.
Debate is closed. The question before us is, shall House Bill number 675 pass the House? Clerk will unlock the machine and the members will record their votes. Yep. Has every member voted? Are there members that wish to change their vote? Clerk will lock the machine and read the pairs.
Cheney votes aye. Wood votes nay.
The vote count shows 55 in favor with 13 against and 2 absent. House Bill number 675 has passed the House. We transmitted to the Senate. Gentleman from 14.